We're here in Peru, Vermont. John Stark had called for the mustering of the troops at Fort No. 4, which is located on the Connecticut River, which is Charlestown today. As people started to muster and the troops, the militia, the New Hampshire militia came in, he started to send various small groups to Vermont, maybe small groups of 100. Those troops were coming across basically what is Route 11 today through Springfield. They entered Bennington County from Weston at Landgrove. They came down Utley Flats, Old County Road is there. They came across, they came up and actually hacked their way through the woods at where Hapgood Pond is today. Then they cut down North Street and then they came to this area. And this is the encampment on August 6th, where Stark had over 1,000 troops that were going to the Battle of Bennington. And why was it here? There are springs here. There's several springs down here. There are springs that have dried up down there, and that's what troops need. This monument to that encampment says, Encampment of General John Stark, August 6, 1777, while on his march with the 1,000 men from Charlestown, New Hampshire, through the woods to the Battle of Bennington. We're here at the Bromley Overlook. There's Bromley Ski Area. Just past that in Peru is the encampment that we were just at. Stark left on August 7th. He crossed what is now Route 11. He came through what is called French Hollow. He went all the way over that mountain down into Manchester. He did not go on Route 11. That hadn't been built yet, and neither had the Peru Turnpike. Now we're going down into Manchester to see how he came into the Vermont Valley. As we saw, Stark's troops, over 1,000 of them, camped in Peru, August 6th. The morning of the 7th, they came down through French Hollow, as we saw, and they entered Manchester across the Green Mountains from Downers Glen, that big cut in the mountain there, came down Bourne Brook, across the Battenkill, and up Munson Brook towards the Southern Vermont Arts Center. We're here at Southern Vermont Arts Center. Stark's troops came up Munson Brook, basically up Ways Lane from the Battenkill, cut across what is now Manchester West Road, and came to the lower part of Southern Vermont Arts Center. And you say, why? Well, the reason is water. There was a lot of springs here. This one still exists, and you can see just easily, or you can hear almost the spring water coming. There used to be 10, 12, 15 springs all the way up to the Yester House, and that's what troops want. They want water. And so Stark's troops came here, and that was August 7th, 1777. We're now in Manchester Village. As we just saw, General Stark's camp was at the Southern Vermont Arts Center about 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the road. Manchester West Road was the main road, north-south, so it was very convenient to Manchester Village. But this is where all the activity was. You had the Marsh Tavern, which was right here. So General John Stark, here in Manchester, meets General Benjamin Lincoln. Benjamin Lincoln was an emissary sent by George Washington. He was a New Englander. He was from Massachusetts. He was sent by George Washington to tell Stark to bring his 1,000+ New Hampshire troops over to Saratoga to stop Burgoyne moving south. General John Stark said no. He defied George Washington. When Benjamin Lincoln asked why, he basically gave 3 reasons. One is, he said, I'm an independent command. I only report to the New Hampshire legislature. The second reason was, he said, I'm here to defend Vermont. If Vermont falls, New Hampshire is next. And he said, third reason, and more important, I can help the cause of the colonists by going to Bennington. Because as Burgoyne moves south with 10,000, an armada of 10,000 people, he's going to run out of horses, foodstuff, ammunition, and so on. And I think that he's going to send a contingent to Bennington to try and get the storehouse down there, and that was where the battle monument is today. That was the storehouse for the entire Northern Army. So I think I'm taking my troops down to Bennington. So John Stark, defying George Washington, takes his 1,000+ troops down to Bennington. On the way, he picked up some Green Mountain Boys who were camped down by River Road about 1.5 miles from here, and Seth Warner. He left a few Green Mountain Boys here under General Samuel Safford, but he basically left Manchester undefended, and he went south to Bennington, about 22 miles to the south. We're now in Old Bennington. We're at the site of the Catamount Tavern. When John Stark left Manchester after defying Benjamin Lincoln and not taking his troops to Saratoga, he brought them down to Old Bennington. And he made his headquarters here at the Catamount Tavern, which was a large facility. Why here? Well, first there were some Green Mountain Boys here. It was also the Council of Safety had moved from Manchester, the governing body of Vermont. The Council of Safety made their headquarters at the Catamount Tavern. They used to meet here. It was also down the road from the actual supply depot. John Stark used to take his horse and go out and visit his troops, which were about 2 miles to the west on Route 9. So he would ride back and forth between meeting with the political leaders and then also being out there. Now let's go and visit the campsite, the place where John Stark's New Hampshire troops, militia, were camped. We're now about 2 to 3 miles west of the Catamount Tavern where Stark had his headquarters. We're on very busy Route 9. You can hear the cars coming. We're opposite the marker which was put up by New Hampshire, which marks the place of Dimmock's stand. Stand was the word for tavern. This is where Stark's over 1,000 troops camped. Why here? Well, Dimmock's stand was actually the home of Samuel Herrick. Herrick was from Bennington, so John Stark was using Samuel Herrick's knowledge of Bennington. Also, the Catamount Tavern and the storehouse is directly west, and if the Hessians and the Brunswickers were going to come, they were going to come from this direction so he could cut them off. So it was very strategic. So Stark made a very smart move and put his first camp here. He broke camp on the morning of August 13th. We're now on Airport Road. About 2 or 3 miles south of here is where the camp number 1 was, Dimmock Stand. Of course, the airport has been built, but the old road went right through towards his camp. Stark moved his troops up here the morning of August 14th and then took them out about 2 miles to the north to his second camp. But located right here was the Harmon Tavern. And as this marker points out, very simply, John Stark stopped here to have breakfast. We don't know what he had for breakfast, scrambled eggs or whatever, but he stopped here to have breakfast. He must have been going back and forth, moving his camp from camp number 1 to eventually camp number 2. It's very interesting too, at this Harmon Tavern, Daniel Harmon, the following year, was born. Daniel Harmon went on to be a Canadian explorer, well known in Canada, about the western part of Canada. But now let's move on to the next spot as we work our way towards Stark's eventual camp number 2. We're now at the Henry Covered Bridge here in Bennington, Vermont. This is the spot in 1777 when John Stark and his troops crossed the Walloomsac River to get to his second camp on the way to the Battle of Bennington. And why did he choose this spot? The bridge was not here at the time. This was built later, but there was apparently a smaller bridge, but you really didn't need a bridge here. You can see the river is very, very shallow here. Another reason was Seth Warner, who was head of the Green Mountain Boys, lived about 200 yards down the road, and John Stark took advantage of the local knowledge that Samuel Herrick had and Seth Warner had. In fact, the Henry house here is an almost exact replica of Seth Warner's original house. This bridge was also the spot 5 years prior where James Breckinridge and the Green Mountain Boys held off the sheriff from New York who was trying to evict them. So now let's move on. Let's go to John Stark's second camp. It's just up the road about a mile. We're now on Harrington Road in Bennington, Vermont, and this is a very historic spot in Vermont history. This is the spot of John Stark's second camp. He camped here August 14, 15, and 16. By the time he got here, and after 2 or 3 days, other troops had come in. So he had his New Hampshire militia, he had troops from Massachusetts come, and of course he had a lot of Vermonters here. And you can envision 2,000 troops out here. He made it at times even look bigger, because the story goes that he used to move troops back and forth so the British troops would think he had more troops. The eventual battlefield is actually right across there. New York State is just right there, about a mile, mile and a half. If those trees were not there, you could see the Bennington battlefield. But this is also the spot where John Stark made his famous speech here in Vermont. There are the redcoats, and they are ours. Or this night, Molly Stark sleeps a widow. Well, that was his rallying call. I've seen several versions of that, but it all involves Molly Stark and sleeping a widow tonight. But it was from here, on August 16th, that Stark sent one of his officers, Nichols, from New Hampshire, around to the right. He sent Samuel Herrick from Vermont around to the left, and Stark himself was going to go straight ahead to put a pincer movement on the British troops who had their redoubt right over there. It took them about 3 hours to get to the actual beginning of the battle, and that was at 3 o'clock. So now let's go to our next site, which is the actual Bennington battlefield itself. This area is actually where the main fortification for the British, the Hessians, was. Their fortification was called a redoubt, but this is the main area up here. There were other fortifications further down, but this was the main area. As I mentioned, this was the British, the Hessians' main fortification right here. And I thought just a 30-second history of the actual battle, even though that's not really the purpose of the show. It was really to give the Stark's journey here. But over there was Stark's second camp, camp number 2. The Bennington battlefield is actually, the Bennington battle monument is in that direction. What Stark did, at 12, he directed Nichols from New Hampshire to go around there, behind this fortification, and Herrick to come around this way, Samuel Herrick of Bennington to come around this way, and they put a pincer movement on. The battle started at 3 o'clock. It was a real rout. Some of the Canadians and the Native Americans ran in that direction, and the Americans were chasing the British down the hill, and they really were routing them. And as they started to celebrate and everything, a real problem existed. From that direction west, reinforcements, British reinforcements, some more Hessians had been sent by Burgoyne, and they were coming down what is now Route 67. Well, just like as Howard Coffin said in his book, it was like the cavalry coming over the mountain to save the day. The Green Mountain Boys, under the direction of Seth Warner, the Green Mountain Boys had camped the night before in Manchester, came down, refreshed, and arrived just in time and chased the British reinforcements about 2 miles out. There's actually a marker out there right on Route 67. It's kind of an industrial area. It's really nice, but it's right near trains. But it is a very important spot. And that is basically the Battle of Bennington. Of course, the 700 prisoners were taken to Old Bennington, and it was a resounding victory for the Americans. And of course, 2 months later, the British surrendered at Saratoga, and many think that that's the turning point of the war, because they never got the supplies here at Bennington. When you visit the Bennington battlefield, the historic site here, there's a lot more interpretive materials. You can learn an awful lot about the battle. They have interpretive panels here with original documents quoted. They've got information on what came from the east, the north, south, and so on. They've also got this wonderful relief map which really shows the route of Nichols took and Herrick took and so on. This is an excellent map, and it's made out of brass or metal here, and it's year-round, and it really explains the battle. Next, we're going to go down. There are 3 monuments here for the 3 states that had people involved, and that was Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And we'll go down and visit that, and I'll explain a little more about the battle down there, because you must spend the time and go down there and see these. We're now at the New Hampshire Memorial, and I'll read it. It's very descriptive. A memorial commemorating the record of the New Hampshire troops under the command of John Stark in this important and decisive engagement, August 16th, 1777. That was the Battle of Bennington, erected by the state of New Hampshire. Of course, it was John Stark that brought over 1,000 troops down from New Hampshire. And John Stark is really the Ethan Allen of New Hampshire. His statue is also down in Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. Now let's go over and visit the next monument over here. We're now coming up to the Vermont Monument. And I'll just read it quickly, it's nice. In grateful memory of the patriots of Vermont and the other fellow patriots from the neighboring states who here fought for American independence under the command of General John Stark and Colonel Seth Warner, August 16, 1777, erected on behalf of the state of Vermont by the Vermont Historical Society. Now, if you remember, it was Colonel Seth Warner, who was a resident of Bennington, was the one who arrived at the last moment as head of the Green Mountain Boys and fought off the reinforcements of the British. But this is the Vermont statue. Now let's go on over to the next one. We're now approaching the Massachusetts Monument. This was erected by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in memory of those who rendered their services here to the Battle of Bennington to help stop Burgoyne's advance down. And Massachusetts did send a lot of people. One of the more colorful characters was the fighting parson from Pittsfield, Thomas Allen, Reverend Thomas Allen, who was a cousin of Ethan Allen. He also had several other people from Williamstown and so on. But Massachusetts did contribute a lot of people. By the time the 2,000 people are broken down to where they came from, over maybe 1,200 or something was from New Hampshire. Then you had maybe 300 from Vermont and another 200 to 300 from Massachusetts. Then you had some miscellaneous groups. What is missing here of these 3 monuments is New York, because actually New York State had very few people in the Battle of Bennington. There were only about 24, maybe 50. I've seen different estimates. But it's totally understandable. Remember, you had an armada of maybe 10,000 people coming down the Hudson River and Lake Champlain Valley towards Saratoga. So the big concern in New York was the main body that was headed south. So that's totally understandable. I'm standing here at a replica, a small replica of the redoubt that was built by the Hessians or the British that was up here at the State Historic Site. This is what the main fortification was. It was very temporary. They were only here a day. But this is also a good spot to talk about the wording. The wording is the Battle of Bennington. Some people say it's incorrect. Well, if you look at history and what we've seen today in the Battle of Bennington, it seems very appropriate. Most historians would agree. You have both camps of John Stark were in Bennington, Vermont. Stark's headquarters were at the Catamount Tavern in Bennington, Vermont. The actual battle started from camp number 2, came around here. The 700 prisoners were taken to Bennington from here. And actually Burgoyne, when he sent his Hessian or his British soldiers down here, he sent them to Bennington. So the Battle of Bennington is a very appropriate name. And it shouldn't be confused with the other statement, where was the battle? Well, the battle was at Walloomsac. Walloomsac's a little town here. It's just like actually Stark was in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Well, the Battle of Bunker Hill is a well-accepted name, but the battle itself was at Breed's Hill, so of and at. There's plenty of books written about this, but Battle of Bennington certainly has survived. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. What we've tried to do is trace John Stark's route from Peru, Vermont to Manchester, down to Old Bennington, his headquarters, then to his 2 camps, and so on, and then to here. One of the aftermaths, of course, of that battle was the surrender at Saratoga of Burgoyne, because he never got the supplies. Another aftermath, if you will, it's a state holiday. Another aftermath is, it is said by many that the Green Mountain Boy flag was the flag that was flown by the Green Mountain Boys, Seth Warner's group, and the other Vermonters that were here in the Battle of Bennington. And some even say John Stark had adopted this flag. There's a lot of stories on the history of this flag. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope to see you next time.